1 in 16 million. You have more of a chance to win the lottery or be struck by lightning than what's about to happen in this story. So this is our second episode from Police to Priest. I'm your co-host, Father Rix, and it is a true joy to bring you yet another story from the vaults of Father Joe's former life. We've been so blessed to receive quite a bit of feedback from our first episode, and it's a really amazing thing to see a message like what he had to share resonate with all of you out there. We're hoping to take all that feedback into account and to start a dialogue that will continue as we develop this podcast and figure out the best way to communicate some very deep and profound messages. With that in mind, one of the things that we heard from the feedback from the first podcast was a desire for something maybe a little bit briefer. So we're trying a shorter podcast this go around, and if that's something that you prefer, let us know. If you like the longer format like we had last week, let us know as well. And we're still developing this. It's in its early stages. Again, hopefully this is a dialogue so we can continue to build and make this the most useful podcast for all of you wonderful people out there. So with that, I'll keep the rest of this intro brief. We're now available on all forms of podcasts: iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, plenty others. So wherever you're listening, it would be an extraordinary help if you enjoy this podcast, if you would like to hear more, to go to that particular platform that you listen on and review us, to follow us, give us feedback, give us a review, something that is invaluable in trying to grow something new. And so with that, I will leave you in the good hands of our dear Father Joe. Go in peace to love and serve the world and be kind to one another.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of From Police to Priest. Thank you again for listening and tuning in. This is the first Sunday of Advent. I first want to thank all of you for listening again. The feedback and the responses from so many of you has been heartwarming. I can't thank you enough. Let's start off this wonderful Sunday with the reading of the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. In those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day that Noah entered the ark. They did not know until the flood came and carried them all away. So will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be out in the field. 1 will be taken, 1 will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. 1 will be taken, and 1 will be left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on which day your Lord will come. And be assured of this, if the master of the house had known the hour of the night when the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and not let his house be broken into. So too, you must also be prepared, for at an hour you do not expect, the Son of Man will come." The Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Again, thanks for being here. I'm going to start with a very old story, a story that happened back in my rookie days. A little bit different from the ark, but the idea of staying awake is sort of important. I know the date, the time, and I could remember the event like it was yesterday. It was November 10th, 1985. I was only a cop for a few years. And back in that day, I was sort of on the outs with the chief. I was a young, aggressive, arrogant cop that thought that everyone had to obey the rules, and I was a little too aggressive in my approach to law enforcement. And I don't even remember what happened that caused the chief at the time not to be liking me. I was on the outs, and this is important because of what happens on this very soft Sunday. And that was the title of the New York Times the following day: Horror on a Soft Sunday. You see, being a cop for me and for most, is an interesting job. They claim that it's 90% routine and boring and the same old thing, and then peppered with 10% of terror and horror that often you never expect. To be honest, I loved that 10% most of the time. That excitement, that adrenaline always kept me intense and going. On this particular Sunday in November, it was a beautiful, picturesque day. I was working the 4 to midnight shift, 4 at night till 12 in the morning. And that Sunday, I was at my family's dinner table in the next town over. And relatives were there from Pennsylvania, and we were having a wonderful Sunday meal. But at 3 o'clock, I had to leave and go to the police station, get dressed, and go to work. And I did. And I left before dessert was being served. So I went into headquarters. I went up to the locker room, put on my uniform and my gear. And as I said, I was on the outs with the chief. So during this particular year, I was ordered to the worst part of town. I was assigned to Route 1 and 9 for a traffic detail. I was given one of the oldest police cars and told, don't leave your post. And the reason for that is that the chief wanted me nowhere near his house, which was on the whole other side of town, and one that I was always poking around and actually giving the chief's neighbors tickets for whatever reason. Another lesson learned, but anyway, I digress. So after I put my uniform on and get my assignment, the sergeant said, Joe, you're on 1 and 9. Don't leave your post. You know the chief's orders. And I took the keys and got my car. And not only did I not go to my assigned post, I actually left the town and I went back to my parents' house. They were serving cannolis and I wanted to have a little dessert before my 8-hour tour. And I stayed probably about 45 or 50 minutes. There was no calls. It was a quiet Sunday, like I said, and it was great. And I got to say goodbye, and I got back on my police card, and I was heading back to my post. But of course, back in the day, I couldn't obey orders. And not only did I digress going back to my post, but I went right down the chief's block. For whatever reason, I don't know what compelled me to do so. And as I turned onto his block, it was a street called Camina Street. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye a young man who had been in trouble before in an alleyway right on the corner. And I stopped the police car and I got out. And I actually talked to him over the police car. I kind of strategically placed myself in a safety position. I said, hey, what are you doing back there? What's going on? And before he could answer, there was a huge explosion in the air. One that I had never heard and one that I had never seen before or since. It was crazy. And as I looked up to find out what this explosion was, from the sky came a plane, falling and spinning down to earth. I could see its wing. And I hopped back in the police car and I start calling it in, calling for assistance. 1013, officer needs assistance. I'm on Camina Street and it looks like a mid-air plane explosion. Officer needs assistance. This is where I am. At the time of the explosion, and something I mentioned last week, my dad was a police officer way before me. And at this particular year, he was still active duty. He was in the next town over, a town called Cliffside Park, when I was in Fairview. When he heard the explosion, he knew that it wasn't the norm as well. It was only about 10 blocks from his house and where I was. He goes into the next room and turns on his police radio. And all he heard was my voice. 1013, officer needs help, officer needs assistance. And as the plane came tumbling down to earth, I was watching it, I lose sight of it. And I realize that I'm really too close. And I throw the car into reverse. I back up as quickly as I could. And the plane crashes literally across the street from where I am and burst into a fireball. I back up so fast and not seeing where I was. And I sideswipe several parked cars on the driver's side. I'm actually trapped inside the police car. And I continue to call for help. Fire, EMS, EMTs needed, forthwith. Get me help here, get me help. I'm right in front of the chief's house. And I thought it was the chief's house. It was actually right next door. That transmission seemed to go on for such a long time. It was, in listening back to it, it was only 58 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. As I finished it, all of the power had gone out, even though it was only 5 o'clock on that Sunday afternoon. I was completely in darkness because of all the power lines and the intense smoke that came from the jet fuel. It would be a few moments later when some of the smoke starts to dissipate, and I'm still in the police car. I'm still in the driver's seat. Two people are banging on the passenger side door. I'm not even fully clothed. And they were screaming, "We need help. My parents are in that house. We need help. Help us." And I got out. I got through the passenger side door. I took off my coat. I gave it to the woman who was clearly, visibly upset. It was a 4-family home, and they had run out the back door that was no longer accessible at this point because of the flames. But I went down the driveway. I had my baton with me. I broke the window in the garage door, and we went in, and we got the parents out. And we saved them. What had happened that day were 2 planes. It was the Nabisco corporate jet carrying the pilot and the co-pilot. They had just dropped off the CEO, I assume, for the Giants game at the New Jersey Meadowlands. And it clipped wings with a Piper Cherokee. At my location was the Piper Cherokee, the smaller plane. The Lear jet, owned by Nabisco, would crash several blocks away. I didn't even know it at the time, on a street called Cliff Street, and literally took out half a block. At my site, there were 3 people in the small Piper Cherokee. Fire department responds. They use foam to put out the flames. And the priest from the parish that was literally across the street, Our Lady of Grace, makes his way through the crowd to me. I was securing the scene, and says, "Joe, I have to do last rites on those bodies." I said, "Father, you can't. It's too dangerous. You can't." And he completely ignored me and went in and slips on the phone, slips right in to the fuselage. And I literally see the hand that was hanging out of the plane that was still intact, that he blessed and gave the sacrament of last rites to. Even though I think my calling to the priesthood happened when I was very young, it became unbelievably real on that fateful day, as I watched that priest covered in foam and then soot and dirt and the remains of the 3 people who had died right before us. It was a time that I would never forget. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on which day your Lord will come. I've been awake ever since. I've been awake trying to be aware of the idea that anything could happen at any time. Being a cop then, just as being a cop today, as I said earlier, for the most part is 90% routine and boredom, but it's supposed to be 90% of helping people, being of service, doing the right thing. Many times it's doing things that are a little bit challenging. But that 10%, it's the 10% that I think we all have to stay awake for. It's the 10% that reminds us that God can call us to do something extraordinary at any moment, at any time, at any place. It would be about 4 or 5 hours later on that November 10th day that I will never forget. My police car is actually demolished and crashed on the side, and I keep hearing radio transmissions, "See Captain Ciccone at the command post, see Captain Ciccone at the command post." And I said to my fellow officers, "Where is this command post? I haven't seen my dad." And they all laughed. They said, "Joe, this is the small plane crash. The jet went down on Cliff Street 10 blocks away. That's where your dad is." I said, "Oh my God, I didn't even know that." And then I leave. I finally get a break, and I run up to those 10 blocks, and it's my dad actually looking for me for the past 3 or 4 hours, thinking that I was in that major jet that had taken all of Cliff Street down. For you see, ironically, that was the block that I had moved to when I became a cop. It was my first apartment on Cliff Street. My apartment would be okay. It would be the next block down that would have been decimated. But that command post was right in front of my front door. And my dad, whom I miss terribly, was there supervising one of the worst events that happened in this beautiful little town in New Jersey called Cliffside Park. It was a day that I will never forget. It was a day that reminded me, stay awake. You never know on what day your Lord will come. Thank you for tuning in again. Thank you for listening to us. I can't tell you how important this is, sharing some of these old stories, looking up some of the old reports and being able to relate them to faith, to God. But it's not just me as a priest who should be doing this. It's all of us. Because I think no matter what role we have, whether it's a police officer today or a peace officer, whether it's a firefighter or an EMT person, whether it's anyone, we all have an obligation to stay awake, to do the work that God is calling us all to do. This is Father Joe Ciccone signing off from another episode of From Police to Priest. Thank you for tuning in. God love you all.
This is From Police to Priest, a St. Joseph Mission podcast.